I was walking along the zoo's central path, checking the information signs, when I suddenly heard loud screams. At first, I thought one of the children had fallen or gotten lost, but the screams grew louder and soon turned into a full-blown panic. I ran toward the sound and literally froze in place when I saw a scene that could have been a real nightmare. A large adult leopard was running down the main path between visitors. People scattered in terror. Mothers grabbed their children and hid behind kiosks. A father shoved his wife and two small children into the gift shop and slammed the door, and an elderly couple pressed themselves against the fence of the deer enclosure, afraid to move. The leopard hadn't harmed anyone yet, but the situation was threatening. I grabbed my phone and dialed the security office, screaming for an immediate evacuation and a team with tranquilizers, then rushed toward the leopard's enclosure to understand how this could have happened. The heavy metal door to the enclosure was wide open, and the electronic lock hung on its hinges, clearly broken. I remembered that 10 or 15 minutes ago, a fire alarm had sounded throughout the zoo due to some malfunction in the technical building, and everyone had rushed to check if anything was wrong, and the automatic locks could have malfunctioned due to a power surge. Shadow, that was the leopard's name, had apparently simply pushed the door with his head, and it opened, granting him freedom he'd never even dreamed of. I ran after him and saw that he was running, not toward the main exit where the terrified visitors had gathered, but in the opposite direction toward the service area of the zoo. The gates for food deliveries had been open there today, and I realized with horror that if Shadow broke through them into the street, the consequences would be unpredictable. I ran after him, keeping him in sight, and heard the shouts of guards and the sound of sirens behind me. Shadow did indeed burst through the open service gate, and I burst out onto the residential street a second later, just in time to see the beautiful spotted cat disappear around the corner of a building. The street erupted into chaos. Cars screeched to a halt, drivers panicked and scrambled back into their cars and locked the doors. A woman pushing a stroller screamed and ran in the opposite direction, nearly tipping it over, and a group of teenagers froze in disbelief at a store window. Shadow ran along the sidewalk, completely ignoring everyone, as if searching for someone, stopping periodically, sniffing the air, looking around, and then sprinting forward again. I ran after him at a safe distance, holding the phone to my ear and shouting coordinates to the dispatcher, who was supposed to dispatch a team of veterinarians with tranquilizers. Shadow turned into a small park a couple of blocks from the zoo, and I saw an elderly man sitting on a bench under an old oak tree, feeding pigeons breadcrumbs from a paper bag. The leopard slowed and began to slowly approach him, its huge paws padding almost silently across the grass. I screamed at the top of my lungs to warn him not to move and provoke the predator, but he didn't seem to hear me over the noise of people running in panic. Several people walking in the park rushed for the exit, and someone pulled out a phone and started filming from behind a tree. The old man turned toward the noise and saw the leopard a few meters away, and I braced myself for the worst, but instead of screaming in horror, he simply looked into its eyes and said, very quietly, almost in a whisper, "Shadow, is that really you?" What happened next I will never forget for the rest of my life. The leopard slowly lowered itself to the ground in front of the old man, rested its head on his lap, and emitted a low rumbling sound, not a growl, but something softer, almost like a purr. The man reached out a trembling hand and began to stroke its head, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. A minute later, zoo security and police cars drove up to the park, howling, and men with tranquilizer rifles jumped out. I rushed toward them, waving my arms and shouting at them not to shoot. The senior guard looked at me incredulously, then at the scene on the bench where the elderly man had his arm around the leopard's neck and slowly lowered the barrel of his rifle. I quickly explained that the man clearly knew this leopard. There was some kind of connection between them. The guard ordered everyone to keep their weapons ready, but not to shoot. I slowly approached the bench and asked the old man to explain what was going on. Shadow didn't even turn his head in my direction. He simply lay there, his muzzle resting on the man's lap, his amber eyes half closed. I sat down on the other end of the bench, so as not to upset the predator, and as calmly as I could, asked him if he could explain how he knew this leopard. The man wiped away his tears and began to tell a story that sent shivers down my spine. 18 years ago, he was working as a park ranger in a remote forest reserve. One morning, he heard strange cries coming from a ravine. Not a bird, not a monkey, but something smaller, more desperate. He climbed down the rocky slope and found a tiny leopard cub trapped in a poacher's snare. The wire had cut deep into its back leg, nearly to the bone, and the cub was so weak it could barely lift its head. The mother was nowhere to be found. Rangers later discovered she had been shot by the same poachers and left to rot. The man, his name was George, wrapped the cub in his own shirt and carried it 3 hours back to the ranger station. As he spoke, images seemed to unfold before my eyes. A tiny spotted body covered in dried blood, a thin wire still wrapped around a swollen leg, huge amber eyes filled with fear. George cleaned the wound with water from his canteen and used his first aid kit to stop the bleeding. He named the cub Shadow, which in the local language meant fighter. For the next 5 months, George raised Shadow in a small enclosure behind the ranger station. He fed him goat's milk from a bottle, changed his bandages twice a day, and slept on a cot beside him every night. The cub's leg healed, but the muscle was permanently damaged. From then on, Shadow walked with a noticeable limp, a soft drag of his back paw that would never go away. I imagined little Shadow hobbling after George through the forest clearing, trying to climb trees, but always falling, always getting back up. George taught him to hunt small prey, but the limp made it impossible for him to catch anything faster than a slow lizard. All the wildlife vets agreed Shadow could never survive in the wild. He would starve or be killed by another predator. The only option was a sanctuary or a zoo. George spent months searching for the right place, somewhere with experienced keepers, a good diet, and enough space for a leopard with special needs. He finally chose our zoo because we had a reputation for taking in injured animals and giving them a second chance. George personally delivered Shadow on a cool autumn morning. He stayed by the enclosure for 2 days, talking to the leopard through the bars, reassuring him. Then he walked away, the hardest walk of his life. He told me that he wanted to visit every year, but soon after, a devastating wildfire swept through his reserve. He spent 7 years leading firefighting crews, saving countless animals, and then another 5 years helping rebuild the forest. He never forgot Shadow, but he assumed the leopard had died years ago. The average lifespan of a leopard in captivity is only 12 to 14 years. Last week, George finally retired and came to visit his sister in this town. Yesterday, his nephew dragged him to the zoo. They were walking past the big cat enclosures when George glanced at a sign that read, Shadow, male African leopard, 18 years old. His heart stopped. He moved closer to the glass and saw a large leopard lying on a rock. And when the animal stood up to stretch, George saw it. The limp, the same soft drag of the back paw that he had watched for 5 months, 18 years ago. He whispered the name Shadow through the glass, and the leopard turned his head and looked directly at him. George wanted to run and find a keeper, but he froze. What proof did he have? No documents, no photos from 18 years ago, just a memory and a limp. He was afraid no one would believe an old, tired ranger. So he left quietly, went home, and lay awake all night, haunted by those amber eyes. And this morning, when the fire alarm went off and the lock malfunctioned, Shadow pushed open the door and walked out. He wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He was searching for the man whose scent, whose voice he had recognized after 18 years of separation. Leopards never forget the smell of the person who saved them. Shadow remembered the man who carried him out of a ravine, who bottle-fed him through the night, who never gave up on a tiny broken cub. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please take a moment to subscribe. Not because I want a number, but because stories like this deserve to be remembered. They remind us that love outlasts fear, time, and even goodbye. Hit subscribe and I'll bring you another story that proves the same. Until then, hold on to the ones you love. You never know when a memory will come walking back into your life.